Barron Trump walked into a Texas diner wearing a MAGA hat, and found himself face to face with a group of bikers. What happened next will leave you speechless. It was the kind of diner you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. A small, worn-down spot along a dusty road just outside Amarillo, Texas. Inside, the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee mingled with the faint sweetness of syrup, wrapping the place in a cozy, familiar warmth. Locals and travelers sat quietly, sipping drinks and swapping stories, the hum of conversation blending with the clink of forks on plates. The peaceful vibe shifted slightly when a sleek electric car pulled into the gravel lot. Stepping out was Barron Trump, tall in his jeans and a plain shirt. His most noticeable feature wasn't his calm demeanor, it was the red MAGA hat perched casually on his head. For Barron, the hat wasn't a statement or a symbol. It was just practical, shielding him from the blazing Texas sun. He pushed open the diner's creaky door, his presence quiet but somehow magnetic. Sliding into a corner booth with his back to the wall, he ordered a coffee and waffles, ready to enjoy a quiet moment far from the chaos of his usual world. Little did he know, this peaceful stop was about to take a dramatic turn. The low hum of conversation inside the diner was interrupted by the sound of heavy boots hitting the tile floor. The bell above the door jingled sharply as 6 men stepped inside, each one clad in black leather jackets adorned with patches that spoke of countless miles on the road. They moved with a confidence that drew every pair of eyes in the room, their presence loud even before they spoke. At the head of the group was a broad-shouldered man with a grizzled beard and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His jacket bore the nickname, Bull, and it suited him. His mere presence demanded attention. Barron Trump, sitting quietly in a corner booth with a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, barely looked up. He wasn't there to make a scene. He enjoyed the anonymity of this small Texas diner, far from the noise and cameras of his everyday life. But the group's entrance shifted the air in the room. Conversations hushed, and a faint tension began to ripple through the space. Bull's sharp gaze swept across the diner, landing on Barron almost immediately. His eyes locked on the red MAGA hat perched casually on Barron's head. The corner of Bull's mouth twitched into a smirk, then twisted into something harder. He nudged one of his companions, jerking his chin toward Barron. The other bikers exchanged glances, chuckling under their breath, as if silently deciding how to approach the young man, who seemed so out of place. Well, Bull said loudly, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. Looks like someone wandered a little too far from the big city. His eyes flicked back to the MAGA hat, the smirk growing wider. Nice hat. You sure you're in the right place, kid? The comment hung in the air like a challenge. A couple of patrons glanced nervously at Barron, their forks hovering over their plates. Even the waitress paused mid-step, her face tight with the knees. The room had gone almost silent, save for the faint hum of the neon sign outside. Barron looked up slowly, meeting Bull's gaze with a calm curiosity. He didn't flinch, didn't react the way the biker seemed to expect. Instead, he tilted, his head slightly, his voice measured and steady. Why wouldn't I be? The smirk faded slightly from Bull's face, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He took a step closer, his boots echoing on the floor, and the diner seemed to shrink with each step. That hat says a lot about a man, Bull said, his tone dropping low but staying sharp. And it doesn't say much good out here. The tension thickened, the other bikers now leaning against the counter, their leather creaking as they shifted. All eyes were on the corner booth, waiting to see how this unlikely standoff would unfold. But Barron didn't waver. He leaned back in his seat, his fingers lightly resting on the edge of his coffee cup. Sometimes a hat is just a hat, he said evenly, his voice calm but firm. The room held its breath, the tension crackling like static in the air. Bull leaned forward, his shadow falling over Barron's table. Not around here, it's not, he muttered. And just like that, the quiet diner had become a stage, with every diner in the room frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. The air in the diner was thick with tension as Bull took another step closer to Barron's booth. The sound of his boots against the floor was deliberate, almost a warning in itself. The rest of the bikers watched silently, their smirks fading as they sensed the weight of the moment. Bull wasn't joking anymore. His eyes were sharp, his jaw set. He towered over Barron's booth, his leather jacket creaking as he crossed his arms. That hat, Bull said, his voice low but charged with meaning. It's not just some piece of cloth. It stands for something. Something that doesn't sit right with folks around here. He tilted his head, studying Barron like he was trying to figure him out. You wearing it because you believe in it? Or are you just trying to stir things up? Barron looked up calmly, meeting Bull's intense gaze without flinching. His expression remained composed, his fingers lightly resting on the edge of his coffee cup. The young man didn't look defensive or confrontational, just steady, like someone who had nothing to prove. Maybe it's neither, Barron said after a pause, his voice smooth and even. Sometimes a hat is just a hat. Bull's brows furrowed, his irritation flickering as he leaned closer, his shadow falling over the table. Not around here, it's not, he muttered. Round here, that hat speaks loud, real loud. So what's it saying, huh? You trying to make a statement? Barron took a breath, his calm demeanor unshaken. He set his coffee cup down gently, and leaned back in his seat, his hands resting loosely in his lap. If it's saying something to you, he said, then maybe the question isn't about me. Maybe it's about why it matters so much to you. The room was silent. Even the bikers at the counter stopped shifting, their eyes darting between Bull and Barron. The waitress peeked out from the kitchen, her face tight with worry. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Bull blinked, momentarily caught off guard by Barron's unexpected response. He straightened slightly, his arms still crossed, but his jaw less tense. It matters, he said slowly, because people wear that hat to pick a side. And out here, picking the wrong side can get you into trouble. Barron nodded thoughtfully, his gaze steady. Fair enough, he said, but for me, it's not about picking sides. It's about the person who gave me this hat. A retired engineer who spent his whole life solving problems most people didn't even know existed. Bull's arms lowered slightly, his interest piqued despite himself. Barron continued, his tone sincere. He gave it to me because he believed in hard work, innovation, and the idea that you leave things better than you found them. That's what it means to me. Not politics, not division, just respect for someone who made a difference. The weight of Barron's words seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. Bull's expression shifted, his hard gaze softening just a fraction. He didn't say anything, but he didn't interrupt either. I get that it looks different to you, Barron added, his voice calm but firm. But sometimes, it's worth asking why someone does something instead of assuming you already know the answer. For a moment, Bull said nothing. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier bravado replaced by quiet curiosity. Even the other patrons, frozen in place, seemed to lean in, waiting for Bull's response. Finally, Bull sighed, his posture relaxing slightly. You've got away with words, kid, he muttered, stepping back from the booth. Still don't like that hat, but I'll admit you've got a reason for wearing it. The tension in the diner didn't disappear completely, but it shifted. The confrontation wasn't over, but it had taken a different turn, one where words, not fists, might settle things. Bull stood there, his arms crossed, his expression hard to read. The weight of Barron's words seemed to linger in the air, pressing against the unspoken challenge in the room. For a man like Bull, who was used to having his way, Barron's calm and thoughtful response wasn't what he expected. The younger man's steady gaze and measured tone had pierced through the tension, leaving Bull momentarily quiet. The other bikers, leaning casually against the counter, exchanged glances. Their smirks and cocky postures had softened, replaced by something more curious. They weren't sure what to make of this kid who didn't back down, but also didn't fight the way they'd expected. Barron's composure had taken the edge off their aggression, and now they were paying attention. Bull tilted his head slightly, his tone still gruff but less hostile. You talk like someone who's spent a lot of time thinking, he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of his years. But out here, words don't always mean much. Barron gave a small nod, acknowledging the point. That's fair, he replied. Actions speak louder, don't they? But sometimes, the right words can stop things from going the wrong way. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. Like now, for instance. You don't know me, and I don't know you. But instead of assuming the worst about each other, maybe we could figure out what really matters. The simplicity of Barron's words caught Bull off guard again. For a man who had spent most of his life reading people and reacting on instinct, the young man's calm logic was disarming. Bull shifted his weight, his leather jacket creaking softly as he uncrossed his arms. And what is it that really matters? He asked, his voice tinged with skepticism but no longer sharp. Barron met his gaze evenly. Understanding, he said. We spend so much time judging people by what they look like, what they wear, or where they're from. But none of that tells the whole story. If we just stop and listen, really listen, we might find we're not as different as we think. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the neon sign outside. The other bikers, who moments ago had seemed ready for a fight, now looked at Barron with quiet interest. Even the patrons, still frozen in their seats, seemed to lean in, drawn by the unexpected turn in the conversation. Bull's jaw tightened as he considered Barron's words. You're saying we're all the same, huh? He asked, his tone testing but not dismissive. Barron shook his head. Not the same, he clarified. But we all want the same things: respect, a chance to do something meaningful, to be heard. And that's not going to happen if we keep making assumptions about each other. The room felt lighter, the earlier tension dissolving into something closer to reflection. One of the bikers, a weary man with a scar running down his cheek, finally broke the silence. "And you think you've got all the answers, kid?" he asked, his tone less confrontational and more curious. Barron smiled faintly. "Not all the answers," he admitted, "but I've learned that starting with a question instead of a judgment gets you a lot farther." Bull let out a low chuckle, surprising even himself. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his voice softer now. "Most people wouldn't bother trying to talk sense in a situation like this." Barron shrugged. "Sometimes it's worth trying. You never know who might be willing to listen." The shift in the room was undeniable. The bikers, who had walked in ready to dominate, now stood quietly, their tough exteriors cracking just enough to let curiosity and reflection take hold. Bull, still skeptical but less guarded, nodded slowly. "All right, kid," he said, "you've got my attention. Let's hear what else you've got to say." For the first time since the bikers had entered, the tension felt manageable, as though the walls that divided them were beginning to crumble. The conversation wasn't just about a hat anymore, it was about finding common ground, even in the most unlikely places. The diner felt lighter now, though a cautious air still lingered. The bikers stood in a loose group, their earlier bravado replaced with quiet curiosity. Bull, the leader, leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, watching Barron carefully. It was clear he wasn't entirely convinced, but something about Barron's calm and thoughtful demeanor had softened his stance. Barron took a sip of his coffee, and set the cup down, looking up at Bull with a small smile. "You seem like someone who's seen a lot," he said. "Someone who knows hard work, and what it means to build something with your own hands." Bull raised an eyebrow but didn't respond, waiting for Barron to continue. "I think I can show you something," Barron said, his tone even, "something that might give you a different perspective. It's not about sides or statements. It's about what's possible when people think beyond what they know." The bikers exchanged skeptical glances. One of them, a weary man with a scar on his cheek, let out a short laugh. "What's a kid like you gonna show us?" he asked. Barron leaned back in his seat, still calm. "You'd be surprised," he said, "but you'll have to see it for yourself." Bull's eyes narrowed, studying Barron for a long moment. "And what exactly are you talking about?" he asked, his tone cautious but less confrontational. "There's an innovation center not far from here," Barron explained. "It's where we're working on new ways to solve problems, things that can make life better for people like you and me. It's not about politics, just progress." The room was silent as the bikers considered the unexpected offer. Finally, Bull pushed off the counter, his arms falling to his sides. "You're serious about this?" he asked. Barron nodded. "Completely. No sales pitch, no strings. Just a chance to see something different." After a pause, Bull glanced at his crew. "Well, what do you think, boys?" he asked. The bikers hesitated, unsure, but there was a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. "Why not?" one of them muttered. Another shrugged. "Could be interesting." Bull turned back to Barron. "All right, kid," he said gruffly. "We'll bite. But if this is a waste of time—" "It won't be," Barron said confidently, standing up. "Let's go." The group followed Barron out to his sleek electric car, their boots crunching on the gravel. They climbed in, hesitantly squeezing into the futuristic vehicle. As Barron started the engine, the bikers exchanged quiet murmurs, their skepticism mingling with intrigue. The journey had begun. The sleek electric car rolled to a stop outside a massive glass and steel building that seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon sun. The bikers stepped out cautiously, their boots landing on the pristine concrete of the parking lot. The facility was unlike anything they'd ever seen, modern, imposing, and buzzing with energy. They exchanged uncertain glances, clearly out of their element, but curiosity kept them moving forward. Barron led the way, swiping a card at the entrance. The glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a bustling interior. Inside, the air was cool and crisp, and the faint hum of machinery blended with the low murmur of voices. Large digital screens displayed real-time data on energy production and vehicle assembly, while sleek robots moved seamlessly alongside human engineers. "This," Barron said, gesturing around the space, "is where the future happens." The bikers hesitated near the entrance, their usual confidence tempered by the unfamiliar surroundings. Bull, the leader, took a few steps forward, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "What exactly are we looking at here?" he asked, his tone gruff but laced with curiosity. Barron smiled faintly. "Innovation," he said. "This is where we're developing technologies to solve real-world problems, clean energy, sustainable transportation, and systems that make life better for everyone. It's not just about gadgets or profits. It's about progress." He guided them to the first station, where engineers were assembling battery modules. "These batteries," Barron explained, can power cars, homes, and even entire communities. Imagine not needing fossil fuels to keep your lights on or get around. It's about giving people the tools to live better lives. The bikers listened, their skepticism slowly giving way to fascination. Barron's passion was evident, his voice steady and confident as he walked them through the facility. He showed them solar panels being tested for durability, explaining how they could bring power to off-grid communities. He pointed out a prototype for an affordable electric vehicle, emphasizing its potential to make sustainable transportation accessible to everyone. It's not just about building things, Barron said as they reached another station. It's about conversations, listening to what people need, understanding their challenges, and finding ways to help. Progress isn't just about technology, it's about connection. Bull crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. And you really think this can change the world? He asked. I don't just think it, Barron replied, his gaze steady. I know it. But it only works if we're willing to understand each other and work together. For the first time, Bull nodded. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of respect. You've got something here, kid, he said. I'll admit that. The bikers followed Barron through the rest of the facility, their earlier doubts replaced by quiet reflection. By the time the tour ended, they weren't just impressed, they were inspired. As the tour wound down, the bikers gathered near the entrance of the Innovation Center, their faces thoughtful and subdued. The earlier tension and bravado had been replaced by a quiet understanding. The sprawling facility, with its buzzing machinery and determined engineers, had shown them a world far removed from their own, a world driven by ideas and progress. Bull stood slightly apart from his crew, his gaze fixed on the massive assembly lines visible through the glass walls. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Barron stood nearby, leaning casually against a railing, waiting patiently. He knew that Bull was wrestling with his thoughts, and he didn't rush him. Finally, Bull turned to face Barron, his expression softer than it had been all day. I'll admit, kid, he said, his voice quieter now, I didn't expect this. When I saw you sitting there with that hat, I figured you were just another spoiled kid looking to make a statement. But I was wrong. Barron gave a small nod, a faint smile playing on his lips. It's easy to make assumptions, he said. We all do it. But it's what we do after we realize we're wrong that matters. Bull chuckled softly, shaking his head. You've got a good head on your shoulders, he said. I've met plenty of people who talk big, but you're different. You actually believe in what you're saying, and you're doing something about it. The bikers nodded in agreement, their earlier skepticism replaced by quiet respect. Even the weary man with the scar, who had been the first to challenge Barron, now looked at him with a hint of admiration. Bull stepped forward, extending his hand. You've got my respect, Barron. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but I can tell you're trying to make a difference. That's worth something. Barron shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze with the same steady confidence he'd shown all along. And I respect you for listening, he said. That's the hardest part, being willing to hear someone out, even when you don't agree with them. For a moment, the two stood there, hands clasped, sharing a mutual understanding that went beyond words. It wasn't about hats, sides, or even technology anymore. It was about people, finding common ground in a world that often seemed determined to keep them apart. As the bikers climbed back into Barron's car for the ride back, the atmosphere was lighter, almost friendly. They laughed and shared stories, the earlier tension all but forgotten. By the time they returned to the dusty diner parking lot, they weren't just strangers who had crossed paths, they were individuals who had found respect in each other's differences. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and revved their engines, Bull gave Barron one last nod. Take care, kid. Keep doing what you're doing. Barron smiled, watching as the group roared off into the distance. He stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle in around him. The day had started with a challenge, but it ended with something far more important, connection and understanding.